thank you all for being here. There's again, we have a fantastic crew of people that are going to give some great presentations on case studies, and I will leave it to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sean. I hope everyone can hear me well. So my name is Alireza Pourreza. I am the Director of Digital Agriculture Laboratory, and today with me, Dr. Moghimi and German Zuniga-Ramirez from my lab joined me to talk a little bit about how we use UAV and sensors in our lab and in our research. So this is the specific learning objective for this workshop, 1 hour workshop. We will talk a little bit about 3D modeling using photogrammetry, and we mainly talk about how we do drone-based remote sensing in our lab. It might be a little bit different, and we also talk a little bit about how we extract the geometrical features from 3D models. At the end, we will talk about 2 case studies, one for almond yield prediction and the other one for the nitrogen monitoring. So before we start, I would like to launch a poll. Can anyone launch this poll? Because I have, okay. So this is just a question about what you already know about these 3 concepts. So one is about 3D point cloud analysis, about radiometric calibration, and also aerial data interpretation in general. Okay, so we will have this poll again at the end, so we can evaluate how the learning process went through in this presentation. Okay, so let's wait a few more seconds. More votes are coming.
Just as a note, if anyone has questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat window or the Q&A, and then we will have natural breaks during the sessions that then we can go over these, or wait till the end.
Okay, well, good. So we have about 77% response. We can see that in the first 2 items, there are not many, you don't have a lot of knowledge, but in the 3rd option, you have some. Okay, so let's move on. Digital agriculture is a new concept, and in short, we are trying to use any type of data that we can collect from an agricultural field and interpret that to provide some new and high resolution, high spectral, spatial, and temporal resolution knowledge or an insight that would help the grower to make better decisions. This is an overall pipeline of UAS application in our lab. So the first step is data collection that includes aerial data and also ground truth data. The second step is pre-processing, an important step that we make sure our data are precise. So we need to do a precise radiometric calibration, orthomosaic, and then georeference data so we can compare and do some temporal analysis. So in the 3rd step, we try to extract some features from the orchard. First of all, we do per plant data analytic. So we need to identify each plant and segment that. And we also need to extract some canopy profile feature, spectral features. In the 4th step, we try to pair these with the ground truth data. First step is data mining on different features to find out which feature is more relevant to the specific goal that we are looking for. It's nitrogen, yield, water requirement, whatever it is. And then we have a data interpretation models using different machine learning algorithm to classify or regress the data based on the ground truth data. The application would be a monitoring of plant for stress or development of the canopy over the season. And this information can be delivered in a prescription map as an insight knowledge for the growers, so that would help them to make a better decision. So I talked a little bit about 3D modeling and virtual orchard. Virtual orchard is a technology that we developed at the Digital Ag Lab, and that's a method to describe canopy geometry. So this is a short, this is actually a 5-minute animation. I just play a few seconds of that. This is a 3D model of a citrus orchard generated by photogrammetry technique, and we can identify each tree, extract information, and then interpret that to see what's going on. So as I mentioned, this is a long video. If you want to see other videos similar to that, you can go to our website or YouTube channel for that. So at this time, I'm gonna let German to talk a little bit about aerial data collection and stitching, and I'll follow after German's talk. German, you're muted, and I think you can share.
Yes, all right. So before I start, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So hi everyone, my name is German. I'm an SR8 here in the UC Davis Digital Agriculture Lab. In the next slides, I'll talk about area data collection and processing pipeline that we use here in our lab. In the next slides, I also assume that you guys have some prior knowledge and experience with drone data collection and also Pix4D processing. Here I'll talk about mission planning for virtual orchard generation and processing. For mission planning, one of the steps is selecting the grid type. For virtual orchard generation, we collect images in a single grid pattern. The other option would be double grid, which is more suitable for building reconstructions, we think that double grid would work for agricultural fields. However, single grid yields better results. In the next slide, I'll demonstrate a few some results where I compare single grid versus double grid. And versus double grid results. And now another important mission parameters are front overlap and side overlap, and also camera angle. For front overlap and side overlap, we use 85% or higher. Remember that photogrammetry is all about overlap, so we want to have as many overlapping images as possible. Now for camera angle, we recommend oblique angle, which is about 65 to 70 degrees, in which nadir is 90 degrees. So why oblique? Why oblique? We think oblique would work better because we want to have the most accurate 3D model as possible. So with an oblique angle, we can potentially see under the canopy. I mean, this depends on the crop, but we want to be able to see as much details as possible under the canopy. So earlier I mentioned that single grid can yield better results than double grid. So here I have 2 images of process results. On the left, results from double grid images. On the right, results from single grid images. For single grid images, we collected the same images as, we extracted the same images as the double grid mission, but we only grabbed the images from one flight path direction, which represents a single grid mission. As you can see here at one of the corners of the experimental orchards, we have a vertical pole holding a solar panel. We can clearly see that the solar panel was better reconstructed in the single grid images. And the reason being is because in double grid mission, we first take images in one direction, let's say north to south, and then we take images in the perpendicular direction. By the time we get back to this specific spot, let's say the mission took 20 minutes, 30 minutes later, this specific spot will look different from the aerial view. So the sand angle slightly changes, so shadows shift. So the photogrammetry software struggles to find key points in these images. And we can see this effect in the shadow of the pole. As you can see here, it was reconstructed twice. We can also see the same effect in the trees shadows. In the double grid, you can see the shadows. Actually, in the single grid, you can see the shadows are much sharper. In the double grid, we see that shadows were reconstructed twice. So if we have this effect in the shadows, we definitely have this effect on the tree canopy, which is our area of interest. So in this slide, I'll briefly go through Pix4D processing, what we think is more important for virtual orchard generation. Well, all parameters are important, but we don't have the time to go over all of them. However, below I have provided the link where you can investigate each processing step with more detail. So in the first step of Pix4D processing, which is the initial processing option, step 1, we for virtual orchard generation, it's recommended to use full image scale as key point extraction. In the matching tab, we recommend to use aerial grid or corridor, which is recommended for grid missions. In the calibration tab, we recommend to use alternative calibration method. This method gives some weight to the image geotags. So if your images have some geotags, you definitely want to use this, and they're accurate, you will definitely want to use this calibration method. In the second step of Pix4D processing, which is, it has to do with point cloud and mesh generation, we recommend to use half image scale for point cloud densification. And now for the 3D mesh portion tab, I don't have anything to highlight. You do probably want to generate a 3D mesh. Now in the advanced tab, in step 2, I do want to highlight that a 9x9 pixel matching window is recommended. It finds more accurate positions of the densified point cloud. And also in this tab, here on the lower part, we want to uncheck the limit camera depth automatically option. If this is checked, it will prevent reconstruction of background objects. In our case, we do want to reconstruct background objects. And now the third step of Pix4D processing, which is DSM or mosaic generation, we recommend to use the triangulation method for raster DSM generation. This method is recommended for flat areas such as agricultural fields. And we also recommend using noise filtering and surface smoothing. Now I will talk about data collection, multispectral data collection. In our lab, we use the red edge camera sensor from MikaSense. This is a 5-band camera with blue, red, green, red edge, and near infrared bands. We also use the DJI Phantom 4 multispectral drone. This drone has this camera has the same bands as the Red Edge 3, but it has an additional RGB sensor. So this is a 6-band camera. When we collect data, multispectral data, we recommend using 75% or higher overlap. We typically use 80 just to be on the safe side. And we also recommend collecting data within 2 hours of solar noon. And then we also recommend collecting images of the calibration panel before the flight and after the flight. And if you have multiple panels, it would be a good idea to place disperse these panels throughout your target area. So what calibration panels can we use? In our lab, we have this TARP, which is a single step grade scale of reflectance, which has reflectivities of 24%, 12%, and 6%. We also have the MiCanSense panel, which comes with the Red Edge 3 camera. This one has a reflectivity of 60 to 70%. And then we also have another smaller panels, which we made from a big TARP. This is a 26% reflectivity TARP. So we cut it small pieces, and then we use these pieces in our data collection. We disperse them throughout our target area. So this is it about multispectral data collection. It's just a few tips. And now for mission planning for hyperspectral. For hyperspectral data collection, we use the PKL camera from Resonant. This camera has a spectral range from 400 to 1000 nanometers. With a spectral resolution of 2.1 nanometers, we get 281 channels. And then the way this camera uses line scan imaging technology to collect images. And then we integrated this camera to the DJI M600 from using the Ronin MX gimbal. And then here I have a sample image in which we can see the full spectrum of that selected pixel, which again, we have 281 bands. So how do we plan our missions? So the first step of planning missions for hyperspectral data collection, we need to create a KML polygon enclosing your target area. Then after we create this polygon, we can calculate our mission parameters such as overlap, speed, altitude. And then we need to consider when we plan that we have a maximum of 12 minutes flight time. The drone can fly maybe about 15, 16 minutes, but it's always good to plan to have a few minutes. And then once we plan our mission parameters, we can then proceed to create our mission with the mission planner. We use the DJI GS Pro app. And then the other step is we need to update the camera acquisition parameters. We need to update such as exposure. We need to upload the KML polygon that we created in step 1. So the camera will use this polygon to collect data assets within that area of the polygon. So next, I have a short video. This is a time-lapse video for a hyperspectral and multispectral data collection we conducted on a tomato field. This is about two hours of data collection summarized in a minute and a few seconds. And as you can see, due to the clouds, it wasn't the best day to collect hyperspectral and multispectral data. However, we have downwheeling light sensors mounted on both drones to account for any changes in light. And we also placed the five calibration panels that I talked about earlier throughout the field. So I'll let this video finish.
German, there's a couple questions.
Yes.
Since it sounds like you're in a break. How is the RGB sensor different from having an R, G, and B bands?
If you don't mind, I'll answer those questions, and German can follow up.
Okay, great. Excellent.
Okay, sounds good. So the other step, which is a very important step, is ground truth data collection. As part of our Almond geo prediction project using virtual orchard technology, we individually harvested and measure wet weight from every tree. And then Dr. Pourreza will elaborate more on this project in the next future slides. And also as part of our table grape nutrition monitoring project using multispectral and hyperspectral imaging. Here our collaborators are collecting leaf tissues samples for nutrient content lab analysis. And then Dr. Pourreza will also talk about this case study in future slides. And next, we have a poll. Maybe Dr. Pourreza can launch this poll. The question is, what is the best flight mission setting for creating 3D models of an orchard, virtual orchard? You need to select all the options that apply. Let's give it a few more seconds.
While we are waiting for the responses, Dr. Moghimi can prepare. Dr. Moghimi will be the presenter of the next part of this talk, and he will talk about the importance of radiometric calibration.
Okay.
So,
I can stop sharing.
Yes. All right, so.
If I find my controls, there you go.
Perfect, so I close this poll. So before we move on, let me just talk a little bit about the correct answers. Well, oblique camera angle is the correct answer, and so I see that most of people answered that. Single grid is preferred over double grid. That is also the majority, and 75% compared to 85%. So 85% would be better for generating 3D models. 75% is good for nadir multispectral images. Okay, so with that, I let Ali to start his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you see my screen and hear my voice?
Yes, very well.
Perfect. Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for attending our seminar. It's my pleasure to present here today. I will be talking about radiometric calibration and why we need to do that. And then I will present different methods that shows that what is the best way to do that. So we will start with why and then continue with how we should do radiometric calibration. I developed a Python framework for radiometric calibration of multispectral imagery collected by Mikasen, so you can download it from this repository if you would like to play with that. Okay, let's start with why. So the data images that we collect using our multispectral or hyperspectral sensor, they are in the raw format, digital number, or sometimes the abbreviation is DN. So these raw images, they are function of sensor parameters, light source because they are passive sensors, and also the objects that we are looking at. Ideally, we want the pixel values be only a function of materials and objects we are looking at. So we need to take 2 steps in order to get pixel values only be function of surface material. So the first step is convert raw data to radians. Radians has a physical unit. It's watt per square meter per aster radian per nanometer. And we need to do this conversion to account for any sensor dependent factor. For example, gain, offset, or vignetting issues. Most of the time we set our camera in auto exposure mode, so it's out of our control. Then the camera set the best gain and offset. So we need to compensate for that when it comes to do pre-processing and analysis. And once we have done the radiance conversion, we need to convert the images to reflectance. And this step should be done to account for time-dependent factor. For example, any variation of the ambient light. Since it's passive sensor, we use a sun, for example. So it's, as German explained, we might have cloud, then we need to compensate that. So for the radiance conversion, since it's related to the sensor, the company or the vendor of the camera needs to provide you calibration file or information that is required for radiance conversion. For example, for MicaSense, you can find all of those information embedded in the metadata. So we have done 2 experiments in order to find what is the best way to do radiometric calibration. So one experiment was done with the multispectral. The second experiment was done using a hyperspectral camera. As German explained, we have TARPs with different reflectivities, 6, 12, 24. And you want to see, once we use different approach, which of those approaches will result in best result, and then the pixel value will be close to the known reflectivity of these TARPs. Here, I would like to show you the impact of camera setting, for example, gain and exposure. As you can see from top left, we have a lowest gain and exposure. In the bottom right, we have the maximum gain and exposure time. So we change that manually and collect images from one scene. You can see this is from green band. And you can see once the gain increase or exposure time increase, pixels tend to be brighter, even though we are looking at the same object and within a few minutes. And it shows that those camera setting can greatly affect the pixel values. The other issue is vignetting issues. This is a near infrared image, and you can see in the center, this is a TARP. This image was collected from our 26% TARP. And you can see pixel values in the center tend to be more brighter. As we go to the corner, they tend to be darker. And then if you check the metadata of your images, for example, for MicaSense, you can find the coefficient and factors in order to compensate for that. For our sensor, you can see we need to multiply pixel values at the corner by 2, means that it's a big change. And once we apply those factor, then we get a smooth and uniform reflectivity across the TARP. This is what we expected to get. Now I'm going to show you different approaches that we can use to convert images from raw to radiance and reflectance, see which of them is better. So in the first step, this is the step that most of the people do. They convert the raw images directly to reflectance using either panel or TARP, and they neglect the radiance conversion. And you can see what happens. The pixel values or reflectivity of the 3 TARPs that we had was a function of camera setting. So in the x-axis, we can see we had different camera setting, gain and exposure time. And for example, for the TARP with 24% reflectivity, as we increase the gain and reflectivity, the reflectance of the TARP is going to be about 50%, almost double, which we know it's not correct. But if we convert raw data to radians by using those information provided by the company, and then convert radians to reflectance using a TARP or panel, we can see that we can get fairly consistent reflectivity from each TARP across different camera settings. So here, reflectance is going to be only a function of the object. In this case, our objects are 3 different TARPs. And also, the other thing that we did, instead of using a TARP or panel for reflectance conversion, we use data comes from downwelling sensor. As German explained, downwelling sensor is mounted on the top of the drone, and it measures irradiance light comes from the sun. And here you can see, since we already converted to radiance, we still get fairly consistent. It might be a little bit off. And it might be because, for example, the downwelling sensor is not calibrated well, or it might be because the angle between sun and downwelling might be kind of vary across the course of imaging. And this is what the company, MicaSense company, recommend. Use combination of panel and downwelling data. So you can see that we got the lowest RMSE across these 4 approaches that we tested, and the reflectivity get closer to the actual value with lower standard deviation, and also it is consistent across different camera settings. We have done the same experiment, but this time with a hyperspectral camera. And here you can see this white module is our downwelling sensor. We mounted on the top of the drone. We did the same experiment, but this time we had 4 different gain and exposure time. And I multiplied gain and exposure because they kind of similarly affect the DN values, and then just name that the gain factor. So we have 4 different gain factors, and we just want to see that how those gain factors, which are camera setting, can affect the reflectivity of the TARPs. Here you can see as the gain factor increase, which is combination of gain and exposure, as we expected, reflectance of the TARPs increase. This is what we are not looking for. But if you convert digital number to radians and then to reflectance, similar to multispectral sensor, we get fairly consistent result across different camera setting or gain factors. And then this is for the time that we only use downwelling sensor. So here, the result of downwelling was not really promising. And the reason, as I explained, there might be 2 reasons. One is that the sensor might not be calibrated. The second reason, I think, which is the case here, is that we mounted on the top of the drone without using any gimbal to accommodate for yaw pitch roll. So in each of those experiment, the angle between sun and DLS or downwelling sensor might be different. So that might cause this kind of problem. And then if we combine or calibrate downwelling with the TARP, we get better result. You can see RMSE kind of drops to 2.68%. So these are all about TARP and what we care about vegetation and the leaf pixels. So here I want to show you the impact of camera setting on the reflectivity of citrus canopy. So here you can see the same pixels, reflectance of the same pixels across different camera setting, and you can see how much we have variation. Even sometimes we see that the reflectance even is more than 100%. But if we convert raw to radiance and then to reflectance, then we account for those sensor inconsistency, then we got fairly similar spectral response of the pixels. So take home message, the data that we collect, they are in the raw format. We need to convert those raw format data or images to radiance to account for sensor dependent factor. And then we need to convert radiance images to reflectance to account for ambient light condition. And again, you can access to the pipeline that I developed in my GitHub page. So let's, can someone launch the pool, please, for me? Thank you.
I just did.
Perfect. So here, the question is why we need to do radiance conversion. If you remember, it has two steps. We need to do radiance conversion and then reflectance conversion to account for time and sensor dependent. We just want to know which is which.
Okay, thank you very much. Ali, we are getting more and more responses.
Perfect.
So, so yeah, that's very important to do an accurate calibration before we do any further analysis. And if we do not make a good calibration, it's hard to make a conclusion based on those results. So that's an area that we should be careful in. Okay, so let's close this poll. I see that majority of people answered correctly. So
I'm gonna stop sharing.
Okay. So do you want to talk about answers until I'm preparing for the rest of the presentation, Ali?
Sure. I stop sharing, but okay. So yeah, most of you, I think 79% answered correctly. So we need to again do radiance conversion. This is the step that unfortunately most of the time is overlooked, but we have to do that to make sure that the pixel values are only function of the material or the objects that we are looking at. So are you ready, Alireza?
Yes.
Okay, great.
All right, so let me stop sharing this poll. So now I'm gonna talk a little bit about step 3 towards the step 4 of the pipeline. I talked a little bit about virtual orchard and what kind of geometric feature we can extract, and I'm gonna discuss about that a little bit here. So this is a 3D model of an almond orchard generated by photogrammetry technique using the method that German explained. We can extract a digital surface model that I'm sure you have learned about that in this DroneCamp from this point cloud, and that would be something like this. DSM is a 2.5 dimensional image in which each pixel represents the altitude of the corresponding point on the ground. So here we can see that the points with more altitude have a like bluish color. So as I mentioned, we need to find individual plants in each orchard. That would be hard if we want to do that manually, but we know that the orchards are planted with a known planting pattern. These are some of the common planting pattern in orchards in California. So if we know this information and we know the locations of a few trees, we can go ahead and find the location of all trees. So in this case, we select the location of the top left, top right, and bottom left trees, and the algorithm automatically find all points. And if we know the tree spacing and row spacing, we can create a polygon for each tree, and that polygon is indicating the allocated area for each tree. Within each polygon, we can do another segmentation and segment the tree canopy from the background. In this case, the background is the ground. So the part of this rectangle, each of this rectangle that is filled with the canopy, we call that canopy cover. And so canopy cover is actually a good indication of canopy size. And also we assume that it's highly correlated to the amount of sunlight that can be intercepted by each canopy. That's called PAR interception, and PAR interception is highly correlated to the yield and to nutrition requirement, also to water requirement. So if we can have an estimation of PAR, we can know a lot of knowledge about each individual plant. We also calculate canopy volume index. That's not the actual canopy volume, but it's a good indication of canopy volume. I'm going to explain how we do that. Also, we can see that average height and maximum height can be extracted for each tree pretty easily. So this is a segmented area for a citrus tree. We know that citrus tree has a bushier kind of canopy, so it's hard to separate that from the next tree. So I mentioned the volume index is the area below the canopy that includes the empty space around the trunk in the first 1 meter above the ground. So for some trees, it's less indication of the actual volume. For example, for almond, because we know there is an empty space below the canopy. In this method, we calculate that. But for citrus, it's pretty good because citrus is a canopy that starts pretty much from the ground. So these are the two important features that we extract from the virtual orchard. But we wanted to know if what we are extracting are actually accurate. So to do that, we created a 3D model for the same orchard with the most accurate measurement tool, which is LiDAR. So we have an aerial LiDAR platform that has up to 7 returns, so it can penetrate actually into the canopy and generate a very precise point cloud. We also created the point cloud with photogrammetry in the same day. So this is the cut of a side view cut of LiDAR point cloud and photogrammetry point cloud. On the right, we can see that in photogrammetry point cloud, we are missing some points that are more deep into the canopy. We have some sides, and we definitely have the top, but not much inside. But with LiDAR, we can see that we have a lot of points inside the canopy. And on the left, you can also see the aerial view of a DSM generated from LiDAR and photogrammetry. So this is also a view with an angle of the point cloud. So overall, we can see LiDAR is a higher resolution, but they look pretty much the same. Okay, so let's quantify this. They look pretty much the same. We use two different methods. In the first method, we tried a voxel, and we described 0.001 cubic meter voxel, and if there is a point within that voxel, we consider that as part of the canopy, and then we counted all the voxels to find the actual voxel volume. So this is a comparison between LiDAR and photogrammetry point cloud. In the second method, we use the convex hull. That's very similar to what we do with DSM, but we also remove the empty space below the canopy. So it's like you spread a blanket on top of the canopy and then close it from down. And we see that the convex, they don't look exactly similar, but we will see that the values are actually very similar. So this is the scatter plot of voxel volume compared to photogrammetry in the same orchard in 2 different dates, once in June, the other one in August. And we can see that photogrammetry a little bit overestimate the volume if we use the voxel volume. If we use the convex hull, we can see they pretty much agreeing with each other. So, so with this analysis, we can say that photogrammetry can provide us with as good as data as LiDAR for orchard canopy profile monitoring. And that would be much cheaper because you can do a photogrammetry with less than $1,000. You can definitely not do that with LiDAR with $1,000. It will cost at least more than $100,000. So, so photogrammetry is much affordable, it's much easier, and the result is as good as LiDAR. Okay, so let's, can someone launch this poll? Ask this question. What is the canopy cover? It's should be pretty easy question. There are 3 options: a 3D model of orchard, percent of area occupied by canopy, and shadow of canopy on the ground. Well, I can see that almost all of you, most of you answered the right, choose the right options. Okay, so let's end this poll and share the results. As most of you selected the percentage of allocated area occupied by canopy, we call that the canopy cover. All right, so let's continue. So at this point, I'm going to talk about 2 case studies, and I'm going to go pretty fast because we don't have much time. In the first case study, we wanted to predict almond yield earlier in the season using the canopy geometry. So as I mentioned, PAR interception is highly correlated to yield. This is a light bar. That's actually a bar full of light sensor that can measure the incoming light. And this mole is run through the orchards to measure the shaded area under the canopy during the solar noon. And that's an indication of PAR interception, midday PAR interception. So this is not even the total PAR, but as we can see here in this scatter plot, we can define an optimum, we can define how an optimum orchard perform when they have different amount of midday PAR interception. So this is good, but we wanted to see if aerial imaging can do a better job. So to do that, we flew on 3 different almond orchards 4 times during the season in May, June, July, August. We also used the light bar to collect the PAR interception, and that happened only once in June. So here we can see the correlation between PAR interception on the top and almond yield. We can see that it's about 0.2. It's actually under this bar, so yeah, I can see. So it's about 214 with RMSE about 424 pounds per acre. And in the same date, using the digital surface model or the virtual orchard canopy cover, we can see that the R square is more than twice, and the RMSE is way smaller. So we had different varieties, nonpareil, wood colony and different ages and different orchards, but let's take a closer look. So here is par versus almond yield, and for different variety, we can see that we can see a good correlation for Lone Star, but we only had 3 samples for that, so that's not actually something reliable. The most common almond variety in California is non-pearl, so we had a lot of non-pearl, and here we can see that using the par interception, the tools on the top left of this screen, we couldn't get a good R-square for non-pearl and also for others, and overall like this. But if we convert that, if we compare that with canopy cover, we can see that for non-pearl we can get 0.82% R-square and only 200 pound per acre error. So that's actually around 10 to 15% error. So we can say that this might be about 85% accurate for non-pearl, which is the most common variety in California. So that was some good results. And if you are interested to learn more, you can go to our website for more information. In the next case study, I'm going to talk about a project we did for grape nitrogen monitoring, and we did multispectral imaging. So
Ali?
Yes.
If we have, we want to make sure we have enough time for Malika following this session, so we better finish up.
Okay.
Thank you.
So,
sorry.
Sure. So I'll be quick. So briefly, I explained this. We defined 3 different application rates and different plots. We totally had 150 vine that we had the nitrogen label for them, organized in 30 different blocks. So we want to make the most accurate analysis. So we tried to skip stitching, and we took manual multispectral image of each plot. And so we had all 5 vines in each plot, as you can see here on the left. So we segmented them, analyzed them, and these are the histogram of different nitrogen measurements in the lab analysis. We can see that below 2.5 can be considered deficient, and above 3.5 can be considered excess. So we use these 2 excess and deficient class to train a classifier and see how it works for other samples. So let me just skip this. This is a multispectral signature of high end compared to low end. And we can see low end has less reflectance in green and red edge. And because usually a grape leaf with high end it appears a little bit darker in green. So with deficiency, it appears lighter, and you can see that in the green. So we use 4 different classifiers to regress 5-band and predict the nitrogen. And here you can see the R-square for these 4 different classifiers. XGBoost performed the best with 0.56 R-square and 0.23 RMSE, which is pretty good. We actually don't expect remote sensing to do magic for us. As long as it can give us a good insight, that would lead to much better decisions. This is just a comparison between classification of multispectral imagery comparing to vegetation indices like NDVR or NDRE, which is famous for nitrogen stress. And we can see that in classification, we can do a better prediction of pixel values. For example, the pixel values on the edge of the canopy are younger, so they have lower nitrogen, and in the classification, we can see that they appear less bright. More bright means less nitrogen. And but we can't see that in NDRE or NDVI. Also, on the right, we can see high end. On the left, you can see low end. And in NDVI and NDRA, we can't actually see the difference clearly, but the classification is much better. So these vegetation indices might be somehow good, but based on this data, we can say that classification is better. So that ends my presentation today, and also my colleagues. Let's launch this poll quickly. This is just to evaluate how much did you learn in this quick presentation.